breathless at being on such a big stage. We do this for a living now. We've been cannabis activists full-time for the last 9 years. But this, for us, is an apex moment, and we'd really like to thank CannaTech for inviting us and for treating us so well and putting in such a beautiful space and giving us some great food and some great opportunities to network. Thank you so much to Saul. So we're a little bit nervous because we do this presentation in 1 hour and we've been given 18 minutes, so let's see how it goes. For the next 18 minutes, I'd like you to think about this photograph, because this photograph is typical of what happens in the high mountains of southern Africa. This cannabis has been in this valley for over 200 years, and it's very special because nobody really planted it. It's been there since living memory. It self-perpetuates, it comes back every year. They've tried to eradicate it over the last 100 years, but it's there. So if there are any legislators in the building right now, what are you going to do with this cannabis? Are you going to go and count it? Because if you try and eradicate this cannabis, the only thing that will be to anyone's detriment is the cattle in the kraal, because that cannabis is grown for winter fodder and bedding for livestock and nothing else. Just think about that for a moment. When Myrtle and I were arrested in 2010 in our home, the police came in with a whole bunch of guns, stuck a gun in my face for 5 hours, and I was so indignant about the way I'd been treated, we decided to sue the government. At the time, we had 3 choices. We could have admitted our guilt and they found over 1 kilo of weed in our house. They were actually looking for a meth lab, but that's besides the point. We could have paid a bribe. This is South Africa, and at the time, in 2010, we could have paid a $3,000 fine and it would have all gone away, except we're cannabis growers. They would have come back next year and next year and next year. They would have had a live one. Or we could have changed the law. So we wrote an affidavit to the Pretoria High Court claiming our human rights to use the plant. Because nowhere in any government law, anywhere that proclaims to be legal anywhere in the world, is there any human rights written into the document. You've seen the meme, my body, my choice. Well, in law, it means sovereignty. This is my sovereign space, and nobody can tell me what to put into it. Thank you. And also, for the first time ever, we managed to introduce cognitive liberty into law in South Africa. This is my personal argument. I believe that cannabis as an entheogenic plant, just like all the entheogens, unlocks portions of my brain for me to think different. And that is what I want out of cannabis. I want to be able to not just have freedom of thought, I want to have the freedom to be able to think the way I want to think. So, the press got hold of it. We actually set a precedent in South African law, and our case was put on hold. Our charges were dropped, pending the outcome of a constitutional challenge to claim our human rights to be able to use cannabis products in our home. We ended up being called the Dagga couple by the press, and when we saw this poster one day going to work in Johannesburg, we thought 2 people were fighting over a joint. So then we actually got to work. And we were on the front page of a national newspaper, and that was it. Our lives changed forever. So our case in Pretoria is partially heard. We didn't get to the end of it. But at the same time, in a parallel universe in in Cape Town, Ras Gareth Prince was about to do the same thing. And he actually got to the Constitutional Court first, and we managed to put all of our evidence from our case into one big pile. And on the 18th of September 2018, we got this. And they can't take it away from us, ever. And it's rocked the boat internationally. We have an inalienable right to grow our own medicine and consume it in a private space. Except, what if you don't have a private space? Because 90% of this country don't have any privacy at all. They live on top of each other. So only a few people in South Africa have the combination of a private space to use and consume cannabis products. Since then, the cannabis community in South Africa has got bigger and bigger and better and better. It has all over the place. Concentrates cups, cook-offs, cannabis flowers cups here in Cape Town, green sessions, expos all over the country, night markets, music festival in Soweto, parties everywhere. We've got a blog every week. Go and have a look at the Hotbox show. This is our flagship event of the year, as Fields of Green for All. 5,000 people smoking cannabis products in front of the police, and they can do nothing because it's a private space. Introducing Myrtle.
Right now, we are possibly at the most exciting, the most challenging, and the most scary part of our 10-year journey. Because right now, as everybody knows, there's lots of grey areas, there's lots of loopholes, and while it's quite fun and quite challenging to get around all of those loopholes, we have to pay attention to what the laws and regulations are actually going to look like. Because that is the future that we have to live with for the rest of our lives here in South Africa. So it's absolutely crucial that we get this right, that the government listen to us. Our government is very famous for speaking behind closed doors. So we have learned over the last 5 years or so that you cannot get what you want unless you know what you want. You need to articulate what you want and present that to the lawmakers so that we can all be on the same page. So for the last 5 years, we have been writing this book. It's gone from scribbles in my notebook all the way to this final draft, which is up for public comment, and then it will be published early next year. We've called it the Full Spectrum Manifesto for Policy Reform. And full spectrum meaning that it covers everything to do with cannabis. And if you look at the table of contents at the beginning of this book and you find something that we haven't covered, please let us know. Because we have 22 South African government departments to deal with when it comes to cannabis. How are we going to get everybody on the same page? It seems like an impossible task. So what we've done is we've created a tick box. We are not demanding that you do everything we suggest you do, but this is the beginning of the conversation, so that at least we all start on the same page. But it's not all serious. The Dagga private clubs are there in the background. And Fields of Green for All has always tried to create awareness and distribute documents and information for the South African and international public. So on the one side, we have our really serious Full Spectrum Manifesto, and on the other side, we are helping South Africans to open private clubs as per our new privacy law. But all very well, we need to build a foundation, an ethical foundation of principles, because as you know, South Africa is in a bit of a mess when it comes to ethics. So we have a few foundational principles to share with you today. If the government say to us, oh, you're only allowed 15 plants each, who is going to come and count those plants? And who actually comes to count my bottles of whiskey in my house? So we need proportionality, we need certainty, because at the moment we're stuck in this grey area and it's really confusing. It gives me a lot of emails to answer. We need a bit of foresight because we can only do this once. South Africa hasn't got the time nor the resources to keep on revising the laws over and over again. We need that durability to make our laws solid and to make them last. Now, this is something that is a rare and beautiful thing in South Africa. Transparency and accountability, there's not too much of that around when it comes to our government. So if we strive for transparency and accountability, we will hopefully end up with capable regulators. And by capable regulators, we mean those people who understand cannabis, not just those people who want to impose their laws on us. And then if we go through all of these principles, it is logical that we end up with regulations that are relevant to our social context. And as we've heard it said in CannaTech over and over again, South Africa is unique, but so is Canada and the USA. Each place has its own unique set of challenges. So we'd like to stick to the relevance of our social context. And just an overview of these of the relevance of the social context, we need evidence-based regulations, regulations that pass constitutional muster. If we are conscious about the way that we do this, and we pay attention to the equal balance of legacy cannabis on the one side and commercial cannabis on the other side, then we should be able to move forward with some certainty. If you see on the either side of this diagram, the legacy people, if they don't fit into that conscious, fair regulations, they will end up being the black market, they will end up being the people with criminal intent. On the commercial side, if we don't stick to fair regulations and conscious cannabis, we will end up with the pump and dumpers, with the bribers, with the unscrupulous business people. So while we cannot get rid of those outsiders, we want to keep it at a minimum using the inside of this diagram. We've seen so many different projections as to what the size of the cannabis model is and what the size of the market is. Ridiculous figures from too low to too high. But if you look starting on the right-hand side of the diagram, you will see that regulations are like a tiered pyramid. The most regulations that we need are for medicinal cannabis, a pharma product that makes a claim and is standard and regulated really strictly, because we're talking about patients here. Then the next level up is your standard and wellness products, where you need slightly less regulations. And then we have our Dagga private clubs and our home grows getting less and less regulations. But if we turn that pyramid on its head on the left-hand side, you will see that the least amount of people in South Africa need the product with the most amount of regulations. So this proportionality is a theme that runs throughout our campaign.
So right now in South Africa, we've got kind of what this looks like. And the takeaway on the right-hand side in the middle is we estimate there are 900,000 cannabis farmers in South Africa. Whoa! 900,000 people either subsisting or on the underground market, in the illicit market, dealing in cannabis. It has been here for hundreds of years, ladies and gentlemen. And the bottom right-hand corner, we estimate a third of this country either uses or condones the use of cannabis products, because remember, it's one of the youngest populations in the world. 60% of South Africa is under the age of 30 years old, and we don't see many prohibitionists under the age of 30. The bottom left-hand corner, the responsible adult use, cultural and traditional use, that is a very important aspect of South African society, because there are many, many Rastafari in South Africa use it as a cultural and a spiritual tool. We never call it medical, we prefer to call it health. And these are the platforms we've been using to argue legalization in a court of law and, of course, industrial hemp. When you drove in from Cape Town in your Uber, on each side of the M2 on the way in, you saw tons and tons of metal houses all crammed together. Colloquially speaking, that is what we call, or it's termed the kasi. It's short for a location where they put black people in the dark days in a location. The kasi is short for a lokasi, a location in South African Afrikaans. Kasinomics is the economy of those people in those townships, and they are fully 80% of South Africa's GDP. And we haven't seen a single Eurocentric report from anybody that takes that into account. And for years we've been saying, if the guy at the taxi rank in the township can't sell that box of matches, that box of weed, then it's not legal. He has to be empowered by legalization to carry on putting food on his table. That is the powerhouse cannabis of Southern Africa.
We've also had some amazing trips around the world, amazing adventures. We do work at the Commission on Narcotic Drugs with the Civil Society Task Force in Vienna. And we love going there every March because we get to meet lots of other people who are just like us, fighting their fights in various countries around the world. We meet together as civil society groups in order to move forward. It's a very important thing to put our work in the context of international drug policy so that we don't just look at carcinomics, we also look at the bigger picture all the time. This is a publication that's also available at our booth that we collaborated on with some UN activists. Here in South Africa, our government speaks sustainable development language. And of the 26 sustainable development goals, there are actually 17 of these goals that can be achieved through the legalization of cannabis. And that is why we collaborated on this book, because this is the language that our government speaks, and we can see how cannabis can improve the lives of South Africans. Now, what we need is a really simple regulation model. We've seen Julian explain with his little diagram what the current cannabis industry looks like in broad terms. Now here we have a really, really simple regulation model, because you take the growers, the cultivators, and the farmers. They need to move through some sort of system that ensures quality, that ensures equity, that ensures access for all. From that hub, as we're calling them, it's a kind of a co-op. The cannabis moves through that hub co-op, it moves into distribution and to retail. So if you take Julian's current cannabis model on the left-hand side, and you take this regulation model that we are proposing, you will see that they are a really good fit. Easily enforceable, easy to roll out, and equitable for all.
Who wants a license? Who wants a license? Who wants to get in bed with an African government? If you do, don't blame me if it goes pear-shaped. What we're trying to do with the license is a blessed release it. Go and have a license. Go take a license and go do whatever you need with the license. But please don't criminalize the other 90% of the country who don't want to get in bed with the people that have been oppressing us for over 100 years. There's licenses in Lesotho, but nobody has a clue how many there are. Somebody said 10, somebody said 12. There's upwards of 40 licenses, and they're all being brought back in now because the licenses become the commodity, and of course the government is actually there conniving everybody. It's not going well in Lesotho. Here, closer to home, a company on the national radio said, we've got a license, we're going to go cannabis here, there, and everywhere. It's simply not true. They thought they did. But the regulatory authority said, no, you don't. You haven't. Nobody has right now. There's a complete state of flux. What about this? Now we're all talking about licenses, but what about this? This is 20 kilometers over the mountain in a place called Polsmoor. And the only crime these people have committed is the fact that they've got no bail. 80% of the people in that room are on remand waiting to go to court for cannabis charges. These people have been in a jail for 2 years without bail for growing 4 kilos. So we have a system called Stop the Cops, and we are watching the cops very closely now because they are not playing the game. There's no warrants, they bash down the doors, they destroy the crops, they take the air cons and the whole thing. The cops are behaving very, very badly. So we are trying to stop the goddamn cops. Nobody talks about this when they're going for licenses. Someone's got millions for a license, but help us out with this. Indiscriminate drug testing, random drug testing, people losing their jobs on the spot for having THC in their system. We're not talking impairment, we're just talking THC. And for those of you who have been in a jail, like me and like that lady there, that is the truth. It doesn't sit well with us at all. So,
while it is really important to get this cannabis thing right in South Africa, there are tremendous opportunities within the support systems. And this has been really heartening to see it at CannaTech, where people are looking into security, people are looking into quality and safety control, they're looking into education and training, really, really important in South Africa. What about the environment? We know that climate change and environmental activism is really kind of the flavor of the month at the moment. What about the fact that we don't have enough electricity even for our own citizens? So what's going to happen with all of these huge, big grow operations that are going to move in? Are you going to come and take our household electricity? So we need to look at caregivers and research, and all of these issues that seem to be sitting on the periphery need to be brought into the spotlight. Workers' rights within the cannabis industry, something that's very, very close to our hearts. What about Dagga tourism? There's been little bits of whispers about it, but nothing too much. This is the way to bring foreign exchange into South Africa. With cannabis tourism, it can become an enormous industry. And then we need to think about our neighbors. We need to involve Mozambique and Namibia and Botswana, Lesotho and Swaziland, all the way up to Uganda, Ghana, Nigeria. We need to involve the rest of Africa in this conversation. So what about the way forward, and how can you help? We have the most exciting project to date after our manifesto, of course, because at the top of our evidence chain is our scientific evidence. At the bottom of our evidence chain is our experience, our lived experience on the ground. Patients like Riley. There are hundreds and hundreds of patients like that here in South Africa. How do we bridge the gap between the highbrow evidence and the evidence on the ground? We do that by knowing the numbers. We've seen far too many reports where the figures, the statistics, the projections are overblown or underblown. So what we've decided to do, in conjunction with social surveys, which is also an NGO, we are going to compile and conduct the South African National Cannabis Survey in 2020, so that all of you and all of us can have some credible figures to work with, and we can bridge the gap between the highbrow and the evidence on the ground. We really need your help with this. And I know I'm running out of time, but please, can I have a show of hands? Who will find a South African National Cannabis Survey useful, and who will support us in this, please? Whoa, that's absolutely fantastic. So you will see our amazing team here, Charles from Fields of Green for All, and Bev from Social Surveys. They will meet you at our booth where you can get hold of one of our manifestos and our sustainable development document, and then we can chat about how we can all work together on the South African National Cannabis Survey in 2020.
We put this up every single presentation we've done since 2010 because this is the crux of the matter. This is how we started the whole fight. We don't have a medical or a hemp or an industrial argument. We leave that to other experts in the field. This was written 100 years before I was born, and it stands true to this very moment for absolutely everybody in this room. And my name's Julian Stobbs.
And my name's Myrtle Clark.
And we're the Dagga couple.